I always listen to the podcasts after I record them just to make sure they are okay. The last podcast is loud and clear, you can hear it very well, but there is a slight bit of hissing sound in the background. I didn't find it terribly debilitating, but if you find it annoying, please post a comment or send me a message. Okay, so we are in prescribing social change. We were talking about holism required in this complicated world, which is divided into states that compete, and within a country there are states that compete. Let's say Amazon wants to set up a facility in your state. You're going to give it tax incentives to move to your state, and another state is going to give it a bigger discount or other benefits to move there. So because you are looking at economic benefits of having Amazon in your state, and so on and so forth. So can this create a impossible situation for holism at meso level, let alone a macro level, for holistic approach to sustainability? So that's what we are talking about. Another related problem with the lack of holism in prescribing social change could be addressed by including externalities in our economic systems. Like when you import something from China, you account for the carbon that's embedded in it. If we are to keep market exchange as the dominant form of exchange in the future as well, we must include all costs when setting prices. So that's like a life cycle analysis based costing. And yes, it was equally unthinkable with market exchange before it was invented as it is to imagining something else today. In other words, markets have evolved, they have become global, they have become supremely interconnected and interdependent. Is it possible then to take these markets towards costing everything based on beginning to end, and including carbon, social costs of carbon, presumably? Flying flowers from Kenya to Sweden is not without environmental costs, even if there seems to be a global consensus to make transportation as cheap as possible to boost the economic flying flowers. I don't know what I said, flowers. Sorry about that. Flying flowers from Kenya to Sweden is not without environmental costs, even if there seems to be global consensus to make transportation as cheap as possible to boost economic growth. In other words, if somebody finds a solution to fly around without greenhouse gas emissions or other damages to the environment, then will we be home free? Yeah, maybe. Similarly, closing down a factory to move it to another place with lower salaries is not without social costs in terms of social security and poverty-induced crime, depression, etc. These costs or benefits that affect actors who did not choose to incur that cost is referred to as externalities. So somebody is imposing something on you that you didn't choose, and including them in the actual price of goods and services is always difficult, of course, but still vital for sustainability even in times of economic downturn. So markets are exploited sometimes by dumping things on a market that's not doing so well, but then the cost is being offset by exporting pollution, by buying cheap things and so on. Although it should be rather common sense and has been repeatedly pointed out by scientists for at least 40 years, perpetual growth is impossible in a finite world, at least in the form of growth in material output, which has been the actual modus operandi for most economies during this centuries, or for most economies for centuries. This paradigm has to be questioned and altered for sustainability to be possible in the first place, and Herman Daly did a great job of doing just that. He has great writings on this problem of using economic growth as a way to convert natural resources irreversibly into junk that cannot be recycled. However, this does not mean that we cannot have increasing quality of life for all people if we balance the use of natural resources and focus on innovation, on minimizing our ecological footprint instead of on maximizing consumption. Anything else is short-sighted in economic terms and potentially cataclysmic in societal social and ecological terms. Or, in other words, uh, Jeremy Grantham said, a co-founder and member of the board of directors of a global investment management firm, has made a lot of money and has started setting up Grantham Institutes across the UK, has motivated his people to set up some institutes outside the UK as well, Singapore, India, and so on. What does he say? Of all the technical weaknesses in capitalism, though probably the most immediately dangerous is its absolute inability to process the finiteness of resources and the mathematical impossibility of maintaining rapid growth in physical output. This is not something that is sustainable by any means. You can have steady increases in the quality of goods and services, and I hope the quality of life as well, but you can't have sustainable growth in physical output. Not if it's completely recyclable and there is a real circular economy. You can have growth for now, or you can have sustainable forever, but not both. This is a message brought to you by the laws of compound interest and the laws of nature. Which, he had an epiphany. He made a lot of money and said this is not sustainable. Then he started putting his money into sustainability, climate change, climate impacts, and so on. Is he still investing in unhealthy markets? That we have to check, because hopefully he is not doing that, right? Anyway, in addition, we must halt and reverse the spread of the economism of the market into spheres of the state and civil society. I'm aware of the central role of economy in a wide sense for all human societies throughout history, and acknowledge that market exchange has been the most effective form for driving development so far. Capitalism is quite consistent with human intrinsic tendency for innovation. Markets provide motivation for innovation. Innovations can do good, and they can be misused as well, right? However, I think it is fundamental to maintain that there are other values in society that cannot and should never be measured in economic terms. Valuing non-market goods like ecosystem services is a tremendous challenge for us. We must never conflate standard of living with quality of life, and never forget the fundamental difference between being well off and well-being. It's therefore worrying to hear governmental authorities, even in the Scandinavian bastion of the welfare state, talk about citizens as their customers, and to hear humanitarian civil society organizations talk about their competitive advantage in relation to other organizations working in the same functional or geographical sector of a disaster area. We'll read the micro level next, but one must confess, knowing my own readings of lots of books, papers, and reports, these ideas are not entirely new, but the author is putting them together in this context of sustainability science, sustainability principles, desired social change, and what can be prescribed very humbly, but they are just collations of ideas that have been out there. Especially Herman Daly is someone I really adore. Okay, at the micro level of individuals, families, groups, and communities, it is of utmost importance that they put pressure on the state and market actors on meso and macro level, as well as shouldering their own individual responsibility for sustainable development. They can do so through mobilizing and demanding political changes, adapting their consumption patterns, etc. However, for people to do so requires motivation in any form. Although the three approaches to motivation briefly introduced above differ in fundamental assumptions and focus, I believe all of them carry some wisdom that can assist us in instigating social change for a more sustainable world. So we talk about ecological motivation, material motivation, and social motivation, and it's not always clear what works best or what is sustainable. If you do one thing, will you maintain it forever, or will you do multiple things if it becomes too much of a hassle? Let's say a single mother who's trying to take care of her child and has to worry about food miles, emissions, reducing energy consumption, how to travel, etc. Can she really manage? The system must provide options that anybody who wants to do this for sustaining the world, sustaining the human environment system should have options, and affordable, accessible, physically and economically accessible, and so on, right? We need to educate everybody concerning our sustainability challenges and what we all can do to address them, even if we as individuals are unlikely to be turned into autonomous change agents driven by such ecological motivation alone. Similarly, we need economic incentives not to buy goods and services with large ecological footprints, though it may be even more important to change the social structures that determine social status. So this is still missing the point, I would say, in terms of the system removing us from the carbon trap and not having anything produced with large ecological footprint at all. Instead of saying you have an option of buying something with a low ecological footprint and a large ecological, high economic ecological footprint, can we just make everything low ecological footprint? Isn't that the best way to sustain? Isn't that going to come out of competition and the motivation to make money? But even if you do that, can't you make money and save the world at the same time? So that's how I would prescribe social change, on how to use human qualities of innovation driven by monetary incentives, material incentives to have a comfortable life. Quality of life and standard of living can be talked about, but how much will anybody give up for quality of life when it requires a lot of sacrificing on the standard of living? So these are not easy questions. So prescribing social change in this somewhat naive way is not really something that is working for me as I record this, just to put my opinion in there. So imagine a society where we talk about and actively address sustainability challenges with our families, friends, colleagues, etc., and where sustainable lifestyles grant more status than our current consumerist ways of life. It's not impossible, it's necessary, but it's much more important to move the system itself to provide material comfort, ecological protection, and social values without destroying the environment. So that's what Herman Daly's ideas are all about. So I will leave this here and then come back and conclude this chapter so that we can then move to overall conclusions of the course itself. Okay, so see you in the next podcast.